Welcome to lecture 15 of Mind and Reality. We've come a long way and we're about to start our very last main topic. Exciting moment for us. This is induction, as we might call it. Godfrey Smith says in some ways this has been the fundamental problem in the last 100 years of philosophy of science. Gosh, what has been the fundamental problem? It's this. What connection between an observation and a theory makes the observation evidence for the theory? And that's the problem that we are going to try to tackle in this part of the course. We want to know what connection between an observation and a theory makes the observation evidence for the theory. Seems like, in a way, perhaps a very technical question, but please be reassured that Godfrey Smith is absolutely right here. This has been a fundamental problem, perhaps the fundamental problem, for a long time in philosophy of science, and we're going to be able to make some steps towards solving it, as well as appreciate it, of course. So let me start by distinguishing three kinds of inference as carefully as we need to. These are deductive, inductive, and what I'll call abductive, or inference to the best explanation. This last one is a problem in particular because it goes by so many different names, so there's scope for confusion there. Let's take a look at a simple deductive argument to give you a sense of this. All chocolate is good. This is chocolate, therefore this is good. And I did, of course, bring along some chocolate to show you. Sorry, that doesn't work very well with my green screen, does it? So here's a lovely piece of chocolate here. Very nice. So here we have an argument which is logically valid. There is no way for the premise here to be true, both of the premises to be true, and for the conclusion to be false. If the conclusion is false, then either this isn't chocolate that I'm showing you here, or else it's false that all chocolate is good. I just better check, okay? No, I don't need to check. It's a deductive argument, right? So what's the characteristic of the deductive argument? Well, it is logically valid. That's to say, there's no possible situation where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. The truth of the premises tells us that we're in a situation where the conclusion is also true. There's no situation where we've got true premises and a false conclusion. Now that's striking because if we take a look at a good abductive argument, for example, my chocolate's gone, right? My chocolate's gone. Now if my chocolate's gone, I've got a puzzle. I've got to work out, what happened to it. And a very natural inference for me to make is that someone stole it, right? Someone stole it. So that would be a piece of abductive reasoning. A good or a bad abductive reason, hard to say, right? Depends on the context. The important thing for us, though, is that this is not a logically valid piece of reasoning. So I accept that it's possible in theory, it's possible in principle, that my chocolate is gone, but nobody stole it. Perhaps I ate it. I didn't eat it, but it's possible in principle that that's other thing has happened. So here, there are situations in which the premises are true and the conclusion's false. So it's not logically valid, but it is nevertheless a very sound piece of deductive reasoning. This is the best explanation for why my chocolate could be gone, that somebody stole it. Was it you? No, okay, good. That's the advantage of the recorded lectures, of course. I get to keep you away from my very delicious chocolate. Marvellous. Okay, now let's have an example of an inductive argument. So here's an inductive argument. Every type of chocolate in my randomly selected sample of 316 types of chocolate, I aim to expand that sample, of course, but I've got as far as 316. Every type of chocolate in this sample is good. Therefore, all types of chocolate are good. So what I've been doing, I've been out sampling different types of chocolate just to be really sure that all chocolate is good. And so far, my observations have supported that conclusion. So here's a piece of inductive reasoning, a rather good piece of inductive reasoning, and I'm very proud of this. A lot of hard work behind it. And what you notice again here is that the inductive reasoning is not logically valid. So it is possible in principle that my premise is true. I have gone out and sampled these 316 different types of chocolate, but there may be out there, maybe the 424th type of chocolate that I'm yet to sample may turn out not to be good at all, in which case the conclusion would be false as well. So I would have a true premise and a false conclusion. So it's possible, however unlikely, that this argument is not logically valid, the argument's not logically valid because it's possible, however unlikely, that the premise is true and the conclusion's false. So we have again, a failure of logical validity. Now what you notice here is that we haven't really got far with distinguishing three types of inference. I've given you an example of each type of inference, so hopefully that helps to get a kind of intuitive handle on them. And we've also distinguished the inductive and the abductive from the deductive because the inductive and abductive are not logically valid. What we haven't done is said anything about what distinguishes the inductive from the abductive. So what I'd like you to do with your lecture buddy or lecture buddies if possible is just have a think, perhaps reflecting on these two arguments here. What is it that distinguishes the inductive from the abductive? What is it that distinguishes an inductive argument, like this one, from an abductive argument, like this one? 90 seconds, go. So I wonder what you got. What I thought I'd do is share with you what some of the philosophers have said about this. So Godfrey Smith says, I will use the term induction only for inferences from particular observations in support of generalizations. So what you can see here is that there's a particular observation or a series of particular observations and a conclusion, which is a generalization, a conclusion about all types of chocolate. By contrast, in the abductive argument, this isn't a conclusion which involves a generalization. I'm drawing a conclusion about a particular piece of chocolate, this one here, which I allege was stolen. It's gone. Confusing, isn't it? Sorry about that. But you get the point. There's a difference between the conclusion with a generalization and a conclusion which doesn't have a generalization. Douven says in the encyclopedia article, inductive inferences may be characterized as those inferences that are based purely on statistical data. So I suppose again here, the randomly selected sample of 316 counts as statistical data, whereas the single observation of my chocolate having gone doesn't. So although I think these two don't overlap entirely, they both do distinguish the sample arguments that we have given, and I suspect it's not very important for us to fuss about exactly how to characterize inductive or abductive arguments. My recommendation to you is to find a distinction that you think is defensible, which is actually defensible, and stick to it. So you could use Godfrey Smith's, you can use Douven's, or you can use another reasonable distinction if you like. Try not to introduce too much novelty. Let's not make a big deal about it. It's very unlikely that we're going to do some interesting philosophy by distinguishing them. We just want to get a handle on a rough idea about the distinction so that we can then go on to do the interesting philosophy. So this relates back to the question that I started with. What connection between an observation and a theory makes the observation evidence for the theory? You see, we can give a very superficial answer to that question. We can say that the connection is this: the observation features in an abductive or an inductive argument for the conclusion that the theory is true. Now that's a superficial answer because it really leads us just straight into the question, well, wait a minute, tell me a bit more about those arguments. But it's useful because it allows us to make a connection between the question that we asked originally and the inductive or abductive types of reasoning. Now you'll notice here that I've included both. As it happens, we're going to follow nearly all philosophers over the last 50 years or so in focusing on inductive reasoning, although in practice, abductive reasoning is far more widespread and arguably more fundamental. It's possible to see inductive reasoning as a special case of abductive reasoning, but not conversely. Or at least that's what Gilbert Harman argued in one of the references for this section, and I think he did that quite convincingly. But despite that, our focus will be on the inductive case. So as I was saying, if we give this rather superficial answer, we're immediately led to a second question, which is really a variant on the first question. What's the relation between the premises of an abductive or inductive argument and its conclusion? So I don't think that we've given ourselves a very deep answer here, but I do think it's useful in terms of setting up our framework to see the same question coming up in two slightly different forms. So take this second question here. What's the relation between the premises of an abductive or inductive argument and its conclusion? What we want is essentially this. We want to be able to say, given a worse argument and a better argument, what it is about the arguments that makes the better one better than the worse one. So let me give you an illustration. Here's, I take it, a pretty terrible piece of inductive reasoning. I'm driving along and I think to myself, well, I've run numerous traffic lights without accident in the past. I always drive through red lights, actually. So I infer that I can run these traffic lights without having an accident. Terrible piece of inductive reasoning. And we'll come back to this and look at why it's such a bad piece of inductive reasoning later, although it may be obvious, which is great. Here's a much better piece of inductive reasoning. Now I'm the passenger, I'm sitting next to Aisha. I must add, it's not Aisha who's taking this course, different Aisha, my friend Aisha. And anyway, I'm very fond of her, but I hate driving with her because I've never seen her stop for a red light, not once. And so I conclude correctly that Aisha will not stop for this red light, and I assume the crash position. That's exactly the right thing to do in this situation because this is a decent piece of inductive reasoning. So what we want to know is, in general, what makes a piece of reasoning a better or a worse inductive argument? What is it about that reasoning that makes it good or bad? That's this second question here. So there we are. What we've done so far is distinguish three types of reasoning: the deductive, the inductive, the abductive, the inductive and abductive being closely related and both relevant to our question about observation and theory. We've reformulated that question as a question about the nature of arguments, just to help us think it through. Oh, I almost forgot. I did want to tell you something in case you've approached this topic before, perhaps as part of your IB or A-level work, probably via David Hume. So famously, Hume said it's impossible for us to satisfy ourselves by our reason why we should extend experience beyond particular instances which have fallen under our observation. So Hume offers a very well-known sceptical argument. It's not something that we're going to be discussing on this course at all. That's for two reasons. One is that some people may have discussed this before as part of their A-level or IB or other previous education. And what I want you to do on this course is to provide me with new pieces of writing that show me your university level skills and engagement with the topics. I find reading your A-level and IB work very tedious, so if you've ever tried to send me an essay, occasionally people do, very occasionally, I never like that kind of thing, because really at university you're supposed to be working in a much more independent way, much more deeper style, actually performing as a philosopher, conducting research. That's what I want you to do. The second reason is that I don't think that this Hume story is all that interesting. It's sort of been very, very well researched. There's a series of different positions that you can take. There's no real consensus on exactly where you should go there, nor does it particularly seem to matter very much. So very interesting. If you'd like to research this more, by all means do. But just please be aware that the question that Hume is asking, why should we accept a piece of inductive reasoning, any piece of inductive reasoning at all, is quite different from our question. You see, Hume took for granted that he understood what makes something a better or a worse piece of inductive reasoning. He then asked for a justification for accepting the good pieces. What Hume didn't realise, and we've discovered since, is that it's surprisingly difficult to explain what does count as a good piece of inductive or abductive reasoning. So in a sense, our project is the more fundamental project of trying to understand the difference between a good and a bad piece of inductive reasoning. We're not at all interested in whether or not you ought or ought not to reason inductively or abductively. That's a different topic. That's Hume's topic. Our topic is, can we characterise a good versus a bad piece of inductive or abductive reasoning, and thereby explain the connection between an observation and a theory when the observation is evidence for the theory. Let's get to it.